Minecraft music discs have always been shrouded in mystery. From the terrifying tales of Disc 5 to the disturbing cries in Disc 11 and 13. But still, most are generally quite upbeat and calm. But perhaps, maybe, they aren't what they seem, as they might just have deeper underlying secrets. This is the story of Minecraft 20's music disc, Relic. And so, our story begins only a few thousand years ago, right at the peak of the Trial Civilization, where this new music disc would later be created. But before we can get into all of that, we first need to understand what was going on at the time within the Trails. Now, at that time, the Trails were doing amazingly. As food was abundant, new technology was constantly being developed, and it was the safest they had ever been within the Trails. And so, everyone was happy. But on the flip side of all these great things that they were able to achieve, there was one negative in their civilization, and that was that they were constantly on the receiving end of incoming attacks, mainly from the villagers and the pillagers. And well, they were relentless, always attacking at any moment that they could. Now, this sounds bad, constantly being attacked, but really, for the Trails, this was actually a very good thing, as it forced them to innovate and grow, as they just had to in order to survive. And so it was due to their successes within their innovation that they were actually able to become a much stronger civilization, and were able to very easily fight off all of their attackers. And so, all was good, as they had very quickly become the most technologically advanced civilization in the entire overworld. But despite all these great things, very soon, things were about to change. As it was on one dark night during a thunderstorm that one of the smartest scientists within the Trails made a discovery that would change everything. As this discovery would change the way that they saw their world, and would be so influential that the Trails would never be the same, as that scientist had just discovered by accident how to make a glowing purple portal. It was just magical. And so that scientist, excited the moment that he saw this, ran into the bedroom of all the other scientists and woke them up. And so they all very sleepily made their way over to the lab where he was developing this, where they too were amazed at what they saw, as they had never thought it was possible to have a portal. And so over the next few hours, all these scientists ran many tests on it to make sure that this portal was stable and safe. And well, once they were certain that it was, then they informed the leaders of the Trails. Now, the leaders were also very shocked to hear about this portal that had just been made, and so they too ran down to see it. And well, they, just like everyone else, were speechless with what they saw. And so the leaders, after spending the next few hours just to admire this portal masterpiece, ran out of that lab and began to set up a group of trailers. A group that will consist of brave, strong, and loyal trail members, whom were then commanded to be the very first beings to go through that portal. Now, they were all very scared, as they had no idea what was on the other side of it. But still, they knew they had to do it, as it was for the good of their civilization. And so together, they all charged onwards, going through that portal. And thus, they were taken to the Nether. Instantly, they began to feel as if they were boiling. This place was just far too hot for them, and many got ready to turn back and go home due to all this pain that they were enduring. But still, none of them did turn back, as they had no idea if they would ever be able to return to this place. And so, they knew they couldn't be wasting this opportunity. So with that, this group of explorers began to explore the Nether. And so it would be over the next few hours that they would venture through the scary soul sand valleys, traverse over the basalt deltas, and jump through the crimson and warp forests, all whilst taking samples of every single item that they could find, as who knows what these strange new items could be used for back home. And so all was going quite well for the first few hours, as they were able to collect hundreds of samples and were all staying safe from the dangers of the Nether. But very soon, that would all change, as whilst walking along the edge of one of the lava beds, they would find them. The only other intelligent life form within the Nether, the piglins. Everyone froze. The trails were staring at the piglins, terrified of what they might do. And the piglins were staring back, confused at what they were seeing. No one was moving. Everyone feared each other, not knowing what was going to happen next, until one of the trail members accidentally took a step forward. And from that sudden movement, the piglins decided to act, and so they all began to charge forward whilst holding their swords. Oh no, this was it. They were all going to die now. They were terrified. So terrified, in fact, that they all stood there, paralyzed with fear. They knew it was coming, and so they just braced when one of the trolls picked up a bar of gold from his bag, just hoping it would give him some good luck in his final moments. And well, it did. As the very moment that he began to hold it, all the piglins stopped attacking, and they all very gently went up to that trailer holding that golden ingot, where the piglins stole it. But they were kind about it, and threw some other items in return for it. That was very odd. But maybe they just really liked gold. They weren't sure, and so other members of the trails began to take out their gold too. And well, very quickly, that calmed down all of the piglins, as they all began to take these gold ingots, and in return would throw so many random items back at the trails. And well, that was amazing to the trails, as they were being given items that they had never seen before. And so they were all very happy. And so this continued for around an hour or so, when the piglins abruptly stopped their bartering process and began to walk away. But as they did so, they gestured for the trail members to follow them. And so the trails, being rather thankful at this point for all these new items that they were given by the piglins, decided to follow along. And so with that, these trail members were lured over to the Bastion. Now, as soon as the trail members saw these massive structures, well, many of them started to believe that this was all a trap, as these giant ominous buildings just looked so evil. But still, they had gotten this far, and so they made the decision to just follow along. And well, that decision would prove to be a very smart idea, actually, as hundreds of piglins from all across the Bastion came out to come and look at these strange beings that were entering their homes. And as they did that, they threw down even more odd items at them. But still, their tour would continue, as they were shown around most of the Bastion before being taken to the very center of the Bastion. And it was beautiful. They'd never seen a structure so detailed on this scale. But then, from the ceiling, came a piglin brute, and he was holding something. What was it? Was it a weapon? And were they all going to die? This must have been a trap, they were all thinking. But luckily, it wasn't. As really, he was just holding some sort of strange disc, which he then put into some sort of strange wooden box that began to relay some sort of sound. That was odd, but Still, the Trails were amazed at what they were hearing, as they had never heard any sounds like that were coming out of that strange wooden box. And although the piglins were completely different to them, they could understand these sounds and interpret them, as it was clearly to them a sort of musical tune that was conveying their life story as a species, how they became who they are today. And so the Trails were amazed at this tech, as it was something that they had never even thought of creating. And so once that musical tune was complete, they went up to that piglin brute who was holding this strange disc of music, and they gestured at it, trying to ask him, without the use of words, how they could make something like that. And well, very luckily, the piglin brute understood what they were asking somehow, and he showed them exactly how they could create their own music discs. Now, as of today, we still have no idea how exactly they did this, but one thing is certain, and that is that after being shown how to make these magical music discs of their own, one of the Trail members did something rather dumb, as they did something that angered all of the piglins, and it angered them so much so that they were all chased out of the bastions. And so the possibility of learning more about these discs, or even developing a relationship between the two species, were shattered forever. And so after being chased out of the bastions, they all agreed to run as fast as they could to get home, as they had everything they needed at this point. And so that's exactly what they did. And so once they were able to get home, just a few days later, they told everyone what had happened to them. And well, they were all shocked to hear that, as they just couldn't believe that there was another world out there, and more than that, they had access to it. But right then, at that moment, that discovery wasn't the most pressing issue, as they now had hundreds of new materials, unlike anything that they had ever seen before, that they needed to experiment on to ensure that there were no nether viruses on any of these items that could infect them and ruin them. And so with that, all the scientists began to go and do their work, attempting to learn as much as they could about all of these new items. But meanwhile, to that very important discovery, all the explorers began to do something else, as they began to create their own music disc, using what they had learnt from the nether piglins. Now, their music disc, just like the piglins one, was going to reflect their story as a species. And so for that reason, their disc was going to begin with the early life of the first Trail members, where they faced many struggles. And so for that reason, it was very deep in the beginning, and it would continue to get deeper and deeper as the music disc progressed, to reflect the ongoing struggles that the Trails felt for years when they were just starting up as a civilization. But then suddenly the disc will shift to become upbeat, representing the sudden turn of fate that the Trails had when they began to take more risk, and were rewarded greatly for it. And then it would continue to stay upbeat for the rest of time that they could run the song, representing how they were continuing to prosper as a civilization. Now, this took many weeks of extreme hard work to create, but once it was done, they began to play their music disc, and they did it right in the Trail city centers. And well, very quickly, when they did that, they got quite a large crowd, a crowd where everyone was amazed at what they were hearing, as they'd never felt like this before. With this strange music, it was so strange, as they could almost relate to these sounds more than they ever could with words. And so it was over the next few months that millions of copies of this disc were made and were distributed to Trails all over the world for millions to enjoy, which they would over the next 1,000 years, as the trails would continue with their constant upward trajectory and progression. And so that disc would over time be loved by millions, if not billions, of trail members. But soon, once again, things would change. And this time, it was not for the better. Now, I'll get into more detail on all of this later, but for now, all you need to know is that the trails, well, they would face a total societal collapse, and every single trail member would die. Now, in this time, most of the copies of their custom music disc would be burnt, as the attacking forces on the trails didn't want to leave behind any items that members of the trails could potentially find and be motivated by to continue to fight back. And so those attackers made sure that the discs, which was the main source of motivation for many trailers, was gone. But at the same time, they weren't exactly perfect in their execution, and so they did miss quite a few of them. And so for that reason, there would be thousands of copies of this music disc remaining in the trails. And so, as over time, dirt would pile onto the trails that would cover this music disc. And so due to their constant contact with mud, many of those music discs would become tainted. And so, because of that, they would gain a slight brown tint, and thus become what they are today. And so now, over the next few thousand years after that, as more and more dirt will pile onto those trails, those discs would become buried deep underground. But with that being said though, if you go into one of these trail ruins and go looking for it, then you might very well find their music disc. Now, because none of the trails are around today, we can't ask them what they called this disc. And so, for that reason, we have to give it a different name. And most commonly, as it is just a relic from the past, it has been given the name of the Minecraft Relic music disc. And so, that's the story over, right? Well, no, not entirely, as there are still many unanswered questions, such as how did the piglins get so advanced to make their own discs? Why are the piglins so advanced within the nether? Why did they get angry? And so many others. And well, actually, many of them can be answered, but to do that, then you'll need to watch this video.